Hey everybody, it's Abby here in Cusco on Thursday, the 9th of February, 2023. Buenos días con todos, soy Abby, aquí en Cusco, el día jueves 9 de febrero 2023. I'm here to give you basic information about what's happening in Cusco today as we continue through months of civil unrest here in Peru. And I will be doing that in English, barring a few quick announcements in Spanish on this particular video. Hoy día les voy a seguir dando información acerca de qué está sucediendo en el Perú con disturbios sociales que están pasando desde el comienzo de diciembre, desde el 7 de diciembre. Y lo estoy dando en inglés, mayormente por lo que en inglés no se encuentra casi nada de noticias acerca de lo que está pasando en el Perú. Y por todo eso estoy tratando de dar un poquito de información y no dar plataforma para opiniones ni discusiones. Mejor ustedes que se vayan a hacer todo eso en sus sitios propios. Pero bueno, lo voy a hacer principalmente en inglés, por lo que mis seguidores que hablan inglés están buscando esa información y yo les puedo proveer por lo menos algo, tratando de ser muy neutra y todo eso. Entonces, muchas gracias por su comprensión. Por favor, no dejen comentarios que pueden ser incendiarios, porque tendré que bloquear aquellos de mi canal. Gracias. So, since it is still relatively early in the day, it is about 8:40 a.m., I'm going to give a rundown of some general news relating to what is going on in Peru. For further context and history, you can go to the main YouTube channel, youtube.com/AbbysYarns, and you can look for the playlist about Peru current events December 2022 and beyond. And that will give you a whole lot of context and probably take you plenty of time to work through if you're going to do that. Meanwhile, today, the 9th of February, 2023, is a day that a number of labor unions and organizers have called for to be a national strike day. And that means that generally for a national strike, people will shut down where they work. They'll potentially do roadblocks. There will potentially be marches in the streets and a lot of that kind of stuff. These are not planned to be violent as a general thing. They rarely are planning violent protest in Peru at this point in time, although there have been some instances where confrontations have broken out. Anyway, so a national strike is called. Why? What are they looking for? Okay, people would like Dina Boluarte, the president of Peru, to resign, and Congress also to resign, and new elections immediately for both president and Congress, or as soon as possible. And then in combination with that, people want some or all of the following things, such as a constitutional assembly to discuss constitutional reform, where people would like to see reformed, among other things, the checks and balances between the executive and legislative branches of government, which some people feel are responsible for the fact that Peru has had as many presidents as it has in the past 6.5 years. I believe it is 7 presidents in the past 6.5 years. And that's a sticky and unpleasant situation, and nobody's able to fulfill the terms of their mandate. And so there has not been a lot of forward progress in any direction because of all of that. And there's been a lot of, frustration over the state of affairs because of that. In addition to that, some people feel that constitutional reform is needed to address the fact that the Constitution of 1993, from the era of former dictator Alberto Fujimori, allows for too much selling of Peruvian properties overseas. So it allows for the signing of contracts with foreign interests in ways that many people feel are corrupt. Obviously, this is something that many people disagree with as well, and it is hotly contested, and there are a lot of strong opinions about it. I'm just trying to present what the opinions tend to be so that people know the sides that we're kind of looking at. So there were a lot of contracts signed for spans of decades in the 1990s, and many of those are due for renewal, and these tend to involve things like concessions for mining, concessions for tourism, including things like operating the train to Machu Picchu, and operations at the site itself, and a lot of this kind of stuff. So these are things that people feel should be generating wealth for Peru in excess of what is actually happening, where people feel that most of the wealth is being extracted from Peru and is not staying in the areas that own those particular assets, whether they are copper and lithium, or whether they are tourist attractions that are world famous. In addition, people feel, in some cases, some people, not all people, again, because everything that I'm mentioning is disputed, some people feel that there have been problems with corrupt infrastructure projects being done, where contracts have been signed with foreign concessionaries who then have embezzled or kind of engaged in quid pro quo and pay-to-play operations, and maybe have not necessarily completed projects on time or to the expected quality. So these are frustrations that many people have regarding a lot of those sorts of things. And so those are things that people would like to see constitutional change to address. And also, some people would like to see constitutional change to make it so that nobody who has multiple pending criminal charges or convictions can run for certain public office. Whew. Okay, so in addition to that, they would like an end to the hostilities, an end to the killing, to what they perceive as state violence, where about 60 protesters have been killed by police in the past 2 months since this whole thing got started. So those are sort of the big things that are on the list. People would like elections moved up to sometime in 2023. Some say 2024. Some say, don't move them up at all. But so these are the things that are at issue with the protests. They want regime change. They want new elections. They want constitutional reform, and an end to what they perceive as state violence. So that is what people are protesting about. So yeah, a large national strike has been called for today, the 9th of February, 2023. And from here, moving forward indefinitely, there have been strikes going on again since the 3rd of January. There were a lot of strikes and protests in December, but they were paused between Christmas and New Year's, and so now we're back in the swing of it, and people are starting to get tired and fatigued because there's been a lot of different effects that are not exactly awesome from all of this protest and civil unrest. Not everybody is happy with it, and so there are a lot of mixed opinions about it. So I encourage you to not get in any arguments with your Peruvian friends about it, because everybody has their own opinion and is entitled to their own opinion regarding all of this stuff. And Peruvian politics is extraordinarily complicated and hard to understand if it isn't something that you grew up with and have been following all your life, if you don't have the context of decades or even centuries of history in Peru. So that's all important to know. So I'm going to try to give some quick news updates regarding what's going on in general relating to that stuff before we find out later today, usually sometime between 10 and 11, if we're going to start to see marches in the street or what's going to happen. And let's see, the first thing to know is that Congress has been in session, but it does not presently have on the table any proposals for moving elections forward, which it has had in the past, and it has voted against. In part, they're voting against it because voting in favor of moving up elections would mean that they would have to leave office, and it's unusual for people to vote to do themselves out of a job, right? So yeah. Anyway, so the prime minister, that is the head of the cabinet, not the president is the president, and then there is a cabinet, and the head of the cabinet here is called the premier or the prime minister, and he has stated that that tomorrow, Friday, Dina Boluarte, the president, Peru's first female president, will be making an announcement. So far, when she has made announcements throughout the past couple of months, they have been that she is not going to step down, and that nobody really wants her to step down. It's a limited number of people who want her to step down, even though polls typically indicate that it is between 71% and 79% of the Peruvian population that would like her to step down and for new elections to be held as soon as possible, with some 73% saying that they believe elections should be held this year in 2023, and another 20% saying they think 2024, next year, is fine, and only 5% saying that they think there's no need for new elections. So that's where we are at with all of that. Opinions vary strategically as to what is really going to be best. People have different goals and different things that they want, and different political parties have different things that they want. And there's a whole lot of complication and confusion with all of that. But yeah, the expectation is that tomorrow she will be giving an announcement, but there's no reason to expect that the announcement will be that elections are going to be convened for sooner, or that she plans to step down. Many of her past announcements have been to say anybody who is protesting is a terrorist or a pawn of terrorists, and that has not tended to calm people down who are protesting. That being said, protests have gone on for a long time and have resulted in shortages in a number of areas, like Cusco, here where I live and grew up, of many key products, including fuel for cars, including propane gas for cooking stoves, and many hot water heaters, including certain foodstuffs, including some medicines, including some medical supplies, and a number of other things. And prices are going up everywhere. And additionally, there have been a lot of closures and roadblocks that make it hard to get around and sort of do normal stuff. And more of that is expected today, if in fact today's protests pan out to be larger, as some predict that they will be. You can look at past videos to find more background about those sorts of things and how we make that kind of prediction. Anyway, so Congress will be in session starting at 10 a.m. today, but again, nothing is on the table regarding moving forward elections. Another really big piece of news is that people are talking, rumors have been spreading about when Machu Picchu, Peru's most famous tourist attraction, considered one of the 7 wonders of the modern world, will be reopening for tourist visits. It has been closed since the, I believe it is the 20th of January, so that's a little while now. The train line has been cleared for operations, and Peru Rail has begun to run 2 sets of trains per week now for local travel. So even though the trains are running, that doesn't mean right now that you as a tourist could go to Machu Picchu and go to the archaeological site, because it's closed. And it is closed by the government and by the organizations that make those sorts of decisions. And so that is not the company that runs that has the concession to operate the train line. So, you know, I realize this can be complicated, but yes, you could go to Aguascalientes in the district of Machu Picchu, but you can't go to the archaeological site right now because it's closed. So, are they in talks about when to reopen it? Yes, and that is not a big surprise. However, they have not published anything firm regarding when they're going to do that. And some people say there's huge demand for Machu Picchu to be reopened, and other people say that there isn't really much demand because 95% of tourism to the Cusco area has canceled since this whole thing started, and cancellations run all the way through July of 2023. So there are, I can tell you, not a lot of tourists in Cusco right now, like hardly any at all. And that includes domestic tourists because it is summer vacation here in Peru right now. It's the break in the school year. The new school year begins in March. And so Peruvian tourists are traveling around with their families and doing lots of things. And usually there's a lot of them in Cusco doing travel to see, archaeological sites and famous things like that. But right now they are largely going to other parts of Peru because of the protests that have been really pretty strong and consistent in the south of Peru, which is where Peru is in a lot of civil unrest. Cusco is located in the south of Peru. Anyway, so protests have been nationwide, though, so, anyway, for the most part, for tourists and travelers, there is not danger, but there is the risk of schedule disruption, and that is enough to make a lot of people decide that they want to go elsewhere. News outside of Peru has been reporting somewhat sensationalist and selected news, and so there's been footage of actual riots or confrontations between protesters and police that have grown violent, but that is not the vast majority of what is happening here. For the most part, protests look like people walking down the street chanting and singing and carrying banners, and then they also look like roadblocks, which are people throwing tree trunks or rocks across a road so that you can't get past. So that's what's been going on. Anyway, how big is today's protest going to be? Well, we don't know. You don't know for sure exactly how big protests are going to be until the day of, and usually until you're a little ways into the day and events start to develop. Sometimes you can tell first thing in the morning, oh yeah, wow, there's absolutely nobody in the streets and 100% of every store is closed and all of that kind of stuff, and nobody's walking around, or yeah, there's already marches out in the streets happening and stuff like that. But usually, in my experience, over the past couple of months, and actually over the 46 years that I have been following Peruvian politics, because I first moved to Peru 46 years ago, yeah, it's later in the day when you actually know what it's going to look like. So, yeah, so we won't know for a little while yet exactly how things are going to look. And I will continue to report and fill people in throughout the course of the day as we do all of that kind of stuff. One other important thing that people think may affect how protests shape up today is that today is the official start of Carnavales in Cusco. It is Compadres, which is the first day, the first main festival of the Carnaval season. And so people may be more interested in doing the fiesta activities, which have been postponed or not able to happen due to the COVID-19 pandemic for several years now. So the question is what people are most frustrated about and what people feel they have the most chance of affecting. Because one of the complaints that many people have, even who support protests against the current government, is that they are ineffective and that they only bring frustration and problems and economic loss for people in the regions where they are taking place, and that nobody in Lima, least of all the government, cares what happens to people who are affected by protests. So, yeah, it's unknown how things are going to shape up today, and I guess we will just have to see. And I'll be back with more throughout the course of the day.